Our next guest I have been wanting to have on for such a long time is Dr. Carmen Boulter. Dr. Boulter is a professor at the University of Calgary in Canada. She teaches in the Graduate Division of Educational Research in the Faculty of Education. She's been researching and writing about ancient Egypt and goddesses around the world for over 2 decades. There's a book out. She also has a made-for-television documentary called The Pyramid Code. Pyramids are such amazing things, and there's so much tied to it. History, so many different things. You can check out her website at www.thepyramidcode.com. Without any further delay, and hopefully my voice will hold up, we've got Dr. Boulter with us for the next 2 hours. Let's get her on the line. Dr. Boulter, good evening, and welcome to AM 630 and Fringe Radio.
Thanks. Nice to be here. Just to let you know, it's pyramidcode.com without the dot.
Oh, pyramidcode.com.
Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. So, Dr. Boulter, if you could you give our listeners a little bit of your background? How did you, and it's a wide open question without doubt, but how you got into the study and your work and what you do with this whole fascinating subject?
I started reading about Egypt and having past life recall as a little girl. And by the time I was 12, I was trying to figure out how I could go there, and I was earning 25 cents an hour, and I called the airlines to find out how much a ticket was, and I finally ended up there for the first time in 1977, and I've been absolutely riveted to it every step of the way.
Wow. There's so much to the ancient pyramids. So much that we haven't touched.
Well, and it's all starting to come together. There's something about new ways of doing archaeology and discoveries that are happening like almost on a weekly basis that is really pulling the puzzle pieces together, and there's a number of different researchers that are bringing their puzzle piece to the table. And so a larger picture is being told, and more is being revealed as people wake up and they're understanding how to put things together. And so it's not as mysterious as it used to be. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think the one thing that's so many people ask is, well, first of all, here in North America, to get there, my understanding is, it's quite expensive to go there. I didn't realize until I started doing a little bit of just researching, for the program to bring on different pyramid experts, what it takes to go see the Great Pyramids. It's a very costly process. And of course, right now with international travel and in the state of affairs with international travel, a lot of people are afraid to fly and what have you. But what an amazing sight to see the pictures, and again, just how much more people are learning about these magnificent structures and how they were built.
Well, it's no more expensive to go there than it is to fly to Asia from North America.
Okay.
And usually we go 5-star because I want to have the view of the pyramids and have the best boat and that sort of thing, to have the best experience, because it's on a lot of people's bucket list. And sometimes, you can go 3-star in Peru and in Asia, but I don't like that in Egypt because I want to look out my eyes and see the pyramids all the time when we're in Giza. So it really is a trip of a lifetime, and I wouldn't dare do it any other way just because of that. In terms of being afraid, there's a tremendous amount of propaganda, and that's been going on since the first time I went. And every time I go, I was like, well, everything's fine. So I was there in April. Everything's fine. And so it's hard for people to believe that or, work with that if it's being repeated and repeated and repeated on the news. But one of the things that I like about getting to Egypt is the propaganda disappears. They don't know what we're saying about them. They don't know how much we're, instilling fear. So I actually feel quite relieved, to be there and not have all that propaganda subtly, creeping in, even though I'm not watching TV or listening to the news here. So really, Egypt is a really great place to go. And, all this stuff about terrorists around every corner, I just don't get it. Sorry.
Well, I think that's just, I think a lot of that is just our media here, is to, everything is terrible. I've been an amateur radio operator for 40 years, and I listen to a lot of shortwave radio broadcasts, and people really need to do that. Those can be found right on the web. and news from other parts of the country is told from a very different perspective than it is here in the United States or in North America. The sensationalism isn't there. I think the sensationalism it's more for ratings than anything else.
Well, and 63 people can be killed in Chicago on a weekend. That doesn't make people stop going to California.
Right, exactly.
Right, and
exactly.
And it's far worse in the States. The number count, it's far worse, but it's the way it's spun. So I think it really, I think it's an act of spiritual maturity to see through that.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit. Well, we can talk about anything that you would like to, but if we could talk about your made-for-TV documentary and how that came to be and some of the details of it.
Okay, it's a 5-part documentary series. I directed, produced it, and wrote it myself. I had been doing international academic cooperation projects when I worked at a university in Taiwan, and they gave me all kinds of camera equipment and tripods and all of that, and I was making video tutorials and programs for my students. And I was continuing. I get 2 months off every 4 months, 2 months off. That was the pattern for 4 years. And I'd go to Egypt, and I thought, well, if I make small tutorials, why can't I make a film? That was one part. And the other part, Hakim Awian, who's being this wizard featured in the Pyramid Code, was really heading toward the end of his days. And he had very severe arthritis, and he just was tired. And so I thought, oh, no one's really taken all of his work and recorded it in any way. So the mandate I gave myself was to, sit with him for days and have a professional team film him and record his words, but then to find scientists that would corroborate what he said. So he just talks and says, he just knows it to be true from indigenous tribes and verbal stories that he was told by his elders, and he is a treasure. And so this was my best attempt at preserving his wonderful teachings.
Interesting. Who built as far as a timeline goes and the people, who built the Great Pyramids?
Well, you see, that's a question. See, the way the news media works it, this guy did it on this day, and this is what the sentence was, and now we can seal the case. But that's not really how things work. And I think that's a precision. I could say it was Mr. and Mrs. Poseidon who hired the 123 building company in December of 36,000 BC, and that still doesn't really help. But that's how we think, right?
Right.
And so there's no precise answer. It's unverifiable. And I think that we need to really look at how research is conducted and align our thinking to something that is verifiable. So we're not going to get the exact story. There's been several world floods since the pyramids were built. And there's evidence of that, and we can get into all those pieces. But who built them, a lot of people want to say, oh, it was the aliens. Hakim does not like that because he says that, it doesn't need to be them, that there were engineers and high-level initiates and serious mathematicians and architects that were from a high-level civilization. So, I think we've got to be careful with the kinds of questions we ask and not to be looking through our patriarchal lenses of this insistence of a date and a time and a stamp, because it may or may not be true. Because as we go through time and we learn more, that precision is unwarranted. Sorry.
Oh, no. I agree.
Okay.
Of course, some of the questions I think that a lot of people ask is that to build these massive monuments, was the technology there at that time period? There's people that say today to try to build them, the way they're built, it would be a monumental feat. And I think that's where, of course, the ancient alien question comes in, and other, higher powers, because again, the magnificent and the size of these things and the complexity of them, did the people of that time, did they have the knowledge and the whereabouts to create these structures?
Well, yes, and it was a completely different space and time, and so they keep telling us we're the most advanced we've ever been, But we don't have, you say it would be a monumental task. We do not have the equipment or the know-how to build the pyramids now, and we don't even have the understanding to take them down. They've been bombed, they've been tried, they would have taken them down because in terms of Muslim things, they don't care. It doesn't fit with what their religion is, and so we can't take them down.
Right.
Never mind put them up.
Right.
So we're dealing with a completely different era, but we're locked into this idea that we're 6,000 years old, and so we can't look beyond.
Right.
And so certainly the date of 2450 BC may have been the last renovation, but the last time you painted the inside of your house is not the year it was built.
Right.
It's a coat of paint that has its own date, right?
Exactly.
So I think it's really important to think differently, and that's what the gift the Pyramid Code gives, is to look at time frames of 26,000-year cycles, which is called a precessional cycle, or Plato's great year, and to look 1, 2, 3, 4 back, like not stay locked in the 6,000 years, because the answers aren't there. So the idea that there was a golden age that tumbled down into an iron age and climbed its way back up through the bronze and the silver back to the gold starts to make sense. And thinking about the legends of Atlantis, they would have had time to go through 2 or 3 precessional cycles, which means they would have been golden and refined, and then they would have come crashing down and been competitive and warring. And so that starts to open up our imagination and possibilities to put the pyramids in a different context. So they are extremely precise, as we know. They replicate the human body, the Earth, the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe all at once, because the fundamental characteristics of how nature works is replicated in those ways. So they weren't infantile. They had a tremendous amount of knowledge. But there's also things like if there's an earthquake or whatever, the way that pyramids are constructed with a shallow inverted pyramid at the base. Mm-hmm. So if there were to be an earthquake or tsunamis or whatever, it forces the stones to get tighter together. So they've endured an awful lot. So they're far, far older than anybody speculates. And, and now we're finding straight-sided pyramids all over the world. And many of them have silt that was left from the last flood, and then that leaves 3 to 4 feet of soil that trees can grow in. So if you look at a distance, they don't look quite like straight-sided pyramids because the trees are all different heights.
Right.
But there's been some excavation done at the Bosnian pyramid, and you can see it's absolutely got all the characteristics of a functioning energy machine. And the Bosnian pyramids are organized and led by Dr. Stan Osmanagic, and he has allowed many different kinds of people, geologists and engineers and Egyptologists and various people that have come to take measurements of those pyramids, and they are very much alive. And that's the kind of thing that it takes for the research to add up to to be able to see all the different domains instead of dividing things up to just Egyptologists in Egypt. And so we have to learn how to think about this in order to be able to ascertain what they could be and how they were built.
The one thing, and again, I'm not a pyramid expert by any means. I find this whole subject fascinating. I've had a few different guests on. I try to do due diligence and research. The pyramids, the Great Pyramids, when we see them, my understanding, Doctor, is that there's quite a bit there that's underneath them too, correct? What we see on the surface is just a part of it, but there aren't there interconnections underneath these magnificent structures as well, or there was at one time?
Well, the truth is that no one's ever done an excavation to actually trace what is in the underground passageways. I spent 5 years with supervision going on the plateau after it closed and looking in and out of these holes. I was looking for a place in particular that met certain characteristics that I had impressions of through my past lives. And so I came to realize that this wasn't precisely the place that I was looking for after all that time, but there is definitely a lot down there. And there are some scans that have been done now with a sophisticated new technology. But Hakim, as a child, said he would walk, crawl, or swim all the way from Giza to Saqqara. which is like 12 miles south. And so there's definitely stories, legends. I've got a photograph from 1910 of a temple of Isis that's on the left side of the Sphinx and below. And then all of this has been cemented over by the Department of Antiquities over the past years. And so there's an awful lot underneath. Inside each pyramid are underground chambers. There's the subterranean chamber that we call the pit in the Great Pyramid, but all the pyramids have underground chambers as well. And then possibly, other things outside the pyramid, tombs and whatnot, because the latest scans have shown things 160 meters, 160 meters below Dashur. And so, again, there hasn't been excavations that line up with those scans, but the reliability and validity of them is growing as they use them and go and dig in a place in another country and find exactly what they thought they were going to find. So that's another whole subject. But this is state-of-the-art technology. And one of the things that goes with that is if people haven't heard about it before and they didn't talk about it in school and it's not on the news, then it can't possibly be true. And so that is just, I think, a knee-jerk reaction. I don't know about it, so it can't work. But there is such a thing as new technology coming out. And there is also a truth of guarding the secrets of the technology before it's released, protecting it in some way, protecting the intellectual property of the people who get the scans done. And slowly, more is getting known about this technique that I'm talking about. And then, yes, and I found another site that is seeming to be, it seems to be the place I have been looking for all these years. And we found it through this scanning technology.
Now, aren't they also, Doctor, okay, let me back up a little bit. First of all, as far as the pyramids go, who governs or rules or oversees as far as, people entering them, or is that the Egyptian government that controls that?
The Supreme Council of Antiquities has been in charge of the pyramids for a number of years, going back to maybe the late 80s. There was a man named the Champion who had the keys, and he was actually nephew of Dodi Fayed, Princess Di's Dodi, or their grandfather. Sorry, they're all second cousins. And he grew up right in front of the pyramids. At the end of the British occupancy, all the land around the plateau was given to the Fayed family. And so Dodi's family moved to Alexandria and then went on to London, and his family stayed there around the pyramids. So they had the keys, and then the Department of Antiquities had the keys. And but recently, with the changing of the guard, it was Dr. Zahi Hawass, who many people know of, who was there for about 30 years, going through his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in Egyptology, and then slowly he worked his way up through the ranks. But with the changing of the guard through the revolution, he was taken out of the job. So now there's another chief inspector for the Giza pyramids, and they're in charge, and they've got the keys. And I've met him on my last trip to Egypt and spoken to him several times on Skype.
So are these the people that if a team like yourself or scholars or if people want to do research, is it quite a feat to be able to do research at that site?
Absolutely. And permits are generally not granted, certainly to no one other than archaeologists. And, even getting film permits is a feat, and I had to get a permit to fly over in a helicopter to take aerial footage of the plateau for the Pyramid Code. And the Minister of Defense himself had to sign the order. And so, it's really, really tricky, though I have managed to get quite a few permits. But permits to excavate are even harder to get, regardless of what you've got. And so I'm in the process of applying for permits because of the strength of the scan of this new place. And we don't know. We can't, twist fate or twist their arm. But if there is interest in something that's quite phenomenal, they may want to go for it. But it's really a tightly run ship. And in the 12 pages of guidelines for applying for permits, the first number says, no new permits to excavate will be granted anywhere in Upper Egypt, and that in brackets said from Giza to Abu Simbel, which is pretty much the whole thing. And it sounds like they're going to make an exception perhaps, for this site. And the other thing is that there's a new changing of the guard. So apparently 18 cabinet ministers are going to be replaced in a week or so, as I am told.
Interesting.
So, and they're looking, hopefully, to have a minister of culture and a minister of antiquities that are a little bit more open-minded to foreign missions. Still under high regulation, high qualifications, and all of that official business, but there has been a trend that they only wanted Egyptologists from 2, I think, universities in Egypt, and no one else was really allowed to do much more than clean sites. So it's been, over the years that I went there the first time in 1977, I haven't seen a lot that has really significantly been excavated. There have been some finds, of course, but a small percentage of Egypt has been excavated, and there's an awful lot still underground.
Very interesting. As a person that has never been there, for our listeners, if a tourist wants to go there and see these great monuments, and again, forgive me because I don't know, and that's what I'm going to ask you. Are you allowed? Is the general public? Are there tours? Are you allowed to enter the pyramids, walk around them, sightsee? Are there chambers that people without permits, as a tourist, can go take a look at?
Well, you buy a ticket to get on the plateau. Mm-hmm. There's a separate ticket to go into the Great Pyramid, but you go in with the average person who's shouting and everything's echoing inside. And, look at me, take my picture. And it's all very irreverent, so I would never recommend anybody do that because for me it's like blows the top of my head off. You have to be really quiet in there because it's an echo chamber. And so I've gotten permits several times to have private meditations for my groups inside the Great Pyramid. And that's not so easy. You have to really have good connections for that. But you can go walk around the pyramids and you can get a ticket to go into the temples. Now, if you go on a tour, you're going to get the Egyptologists that have studied in school and memorized the scripts that are going to talk about Ramses and warring, and he cut off the hand of his enemies, and and it was all about killing people, which is kind of how we think. And so the purpose of the Pyramid Code is to debunk all these things that we learned in school about Egypt. The pyramids were tombs, not. The pyramids were built for the ego of pharaohs. I don't think so. They were built by slaves. Slaves couldn't have done it. They worshipped animals. Well, that's not what those animal totems are for. And that they were obsessed with death. Well, they didn't have a word for death. So that was basically the Pyramid Code in a nutshell. Debunking those kinds of things. But if you look at where the story came from, Herodotus came in 450 BC to Egypt, and there was a little village in front of the Sphinx, and he met a young boy who told him all these stories, and he went back to Greece and created new names for who might have built the pyramids, just pulled them out of a hat. And he repeated the story the little boy told him, and that's what's gotten into the school books.
Gotcha. So there's several different perceptions, several different views on it. There's quite a few people obviously have their own view and make up their own history.
Well, I think there's one view that's the official story that right. We all learned in school. So I don't know that everybody gets to make up a story, but once there is an official story for pretty much everything, it gets repeated and repeated. And we seem to have lost touch with the idea of truth at this stage of our culture. Truth is entirely optional.
Gotcha. What about some of these? I saw a documentary not that long ago as far as all the different shafts and different passageways. I believe there was a group that was letting some type of rover robot climb through some of these passageways. Is that true? To get deeper into it?
Not. There was a team, and they were promised for 12 years or something that they would be allowed to go in there. And they finally did a National Geographic special on it, and they actually had more than one robot, and they let it go in. And Zahi Hawass, who was in charge at the time, was saying that they find the statue of mummy, or the mummy of Cheops in there because they say that Cheops was the one who built the pyramids, and they said it was tombs, so he's looking for the tombs. But there was a lot of politics that went on in that. And what they did find, they didn't understand what it was, and there was a lot of speculation. But for somebody like Chris Dunn, who has understood the pyramid to be an energy machine, he was expecting to find switches and chemical marks that would have participated in the energy exchange. And so as far as he was concerned, when he saw the footage of the robot, he said, "You see, that's exactly what I would have thought." And it was. So the others are trying to say, well, there's just this piece of metal, and we don't know what it's for. But if you read Chris Dunn's book, Pyramid Power, you'll see that he really understood what it was about, and I really value his work.
I looked at did a little bit of research on Chris Dunn, him discussing a little bit about is a great energy machine. Do you believe? I mean, there's also been some other scientists that believe it's some sort of I shouldn't say aquifer system, but some sort of a system for drawing moisture up out of the ground. A lot of different thoughts, a lot of different opinions.
Well, it's not that different. I mean, people can say anything, and they do. But the Nile used to run right in front of the Sphinx, and it's percolating back up. And there's a lot of evidence that shows that the Nile migrated over time to now where it is 8 miles from the nose of the Sphinx. And the division between Cairo and Giza is where the Nile is right now. And so, there's a limestone aquifer as well as a network of honeycomb-shaped man-made chambers underneath. And the Nile, we know, would flood every year, and these chambers would fill up. And there was a way that the water was pushed through, like Victor Schauberger talked about, when water is moving against quartz crystal in sharp corners and being pushed with pressure up through these passageways into the pyramid, there was a way that they could blow the hydrogen and oxygen molecules apart and created a form of passive power. We don't think that way. But then that would be free energy. So this was implosion energy, non-polluting instead of explosion energy. It had to do with sound and light technology, and it wouldn't work unless there were limestone aquifers. So in terms of this theory, that they're not saying two different things. And again, it's a free-for-all. Anybody can say whatever they want. But what is verifiable, what makes sense on the most different levels, and what doesn't leave any major part of the clues out? So what tends to happen with archaeology, if it doesn't fit what people anticipate and think it will say, they discount it. And I think we have to be far more careful than that to piece together such a large puzzle. And what we learn in school doesn't help at all with this.
True. Well, you you have done your homework, and you know the facts, and you've done the research, and there's no disputing that by any means.
Thank you.
The placement of these pyramids, Doctor, that's something I find interesting. When they were built, way back when, we'll just use that as a timeline, the exactness, they're in such exact positions, had to be a feat of that day to line these great structures up.
Well, like we said before, it would be a feat for us, but it may not have been a feat for them. But what most people don't realize is not just the Great Pyramid and a few pyramids on the Giza Plateau. There is what is called the Band of Peace, and that's pyramids to the north and south of Giza. And I've done some work in Starry Night Pro, and I call it my ISIS theory, and it's looking at how this incredible configuration that is connected to the extragalactic grid connects all these pyramid fields. And it's that configuration, when you run a movie of time back 50,000 years and forward to 13,500 AD, that configuration never falls apart. And I still haven't identified, I haven't published it because there's one site that I haven't associated a planetary system with or star alignment. And the others, are pretty solid because they stay together. So if I put something else like Arcturus or Alpha Centauri in for Saqqara, the whole thing blows apart within seconds. So there's something incredibly profound about how the center of the galaxy is part of this, how Sirius is at the epicenter of the entire extragalactic grid, and how the whole of the pyramid fields are somehow related to something that is outside our galaxy. And the alignments are precise, and I've demonstrated that.
Do you believe that some of these other pyramids throughout the world, and again, as you mentioned when we first started talking, people always think about the Great Pyramids, but there are other ones that have been built that, like you said, grass, trees, stuff has grown over. I believe in South America there's some pyramid-type structures. Do you believe that they are all interconnected in some way, shape, or form?
Well, I won't say all, because there's certain characteristics that functioning pyramids would have to have, and that's water and aquifers underneath, certain passageways that run at certain angles, straight-sided pyramids. There's a number of different characteristics constructed with primarily quartz under pressure. So some of them are deliberately misaligned. What we find is the newer pyramids in Mexico, for example, in Guatemala, are not functional pyramids, but among the ones that do maintain these characteristics, some of which have this silt and trees on them, and because it's desert, all that just dried out and blew away in Giza. But, it used to be tropical there, and then, you have to add, tens of thousands of years. So, yes, it appears from these characteristics that there's a network of pyramids that could have been colonized perhaps by our ancient ancestors, perhaps the Atlanteans, that would have colonized and built pyramids in a useful pattern along the ley lines, telluric grids, or dragon lines, as they call them in China.
Can we talk a little bit, just to stray a little bit, but about pyramid power? Somebody sent in a question and said, would Dr. Boulter talk a little bit about the power of the pyramid shape? Some people believe that it has healing properties. It has different effects. Just the shape of what, no matter what size it is, whether it is to keep fruits fresh, to make people feel better. Some people actually have pyramid-type structures over their bed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and there's certain precision even if you make them smaller. They have to be made out of certain materials, and they also need to be aligned and have the correct characteristics. But people have been known to do those things, to sharpen razor blades. I had a little bit of a interesting thing going on for a number of years when I would travel with a Walkman, and 2 AA batteries would last 12 hours, and then I just put the dead batteries in the pockets of the coat that I would wear into the Great Pyramid, and I would come out and they would be good to last for 6 hours. And I've seen that. There was this little girl who was on my trip, and she's like saying to her mom, "Oh, I forgot to charge my camera, and now I'm going in the Great Pyramid, and I'm not sure if it will work. Look, Mommy, it's as dead can be." And I said, "Alexa, just put it in your pocket and come into the pyramid anyway. And after a few minutes, see if the camera will work." And she's like, "It worked. That kid will never be the same after that experience." So I also was noticing over time, because I spent a lot of time in the Great Pyramid by myself and with my groups, and I was finding over time that I was becoming more psychic, and I suspected that it had something to do with the Great Pyramid. So I trained on this device, this special kind of equipment that's actually electrophotonic imaging that was invented by Dr. Konstantin Korkov in Russia, and it's quite sophisticated. And it measures the effect. I wanted to measure the effect of the Great Pyramid on the human aura and the chakra system, and this device shows the volume area of the human aura of each person and the alignment of the chakras. So I was able to do 2 separate studies, one in 2010 with my group and one in 2012, where I took hundreds of readings over 2 groups and replicated the study the second time to show with larger numbers of people how you can use statistical analysis to see how this was so. So I have scientific documentation and results from these two elaborate studies, and it definitely showed that there was some link to that. I defined psychicness by the entrainment of the chakras. And so instead of just having 5 senses, Hakeem insisted that we had 360 senses. And so that meant connections in more than one way, because he insisted that they knew much more than we do, and they had ways of knowing. And so what does that mean? And I think about synesthesia. I'm trained as a psychologist, worked as a psychologist for 17 years. And so there's a phenomena of synesthesia, which is cross-sensory perception. And so someone would be able to hear a picture and see music. And that's common in gifted kids. Mm-hmm. And so that sort of thing was woven into the literature review. And I would say that I was able to demonstrate that the Great Pyramid has a very clear positive effect on reconnecting people. And again, the more connected you are, the more connected you are, the more psychic you are. That's one corollary of that. Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that the pyramid itself, do you believe that it maybe captures or focuses energy?
Well, all of the above. We have the propensity of the ABCD on tests, and that there's the one right answer method of education. But it's just like, where's Atlantis? Well, it's everywhere, people think it was. And there's nothing in Egypt that isn't multidimensional, multi-purpose, and has many, many different ways of being interpreted, but that's on purpose. And so, yes.
So you feel it does maybe harness or focus different types of energies in different types of ways.
Absolutely. There's no question about it.
Again, talking about focusing the energies, different types of energies, like you say, nothing textbook. It's a complex subject that goes many different ways.
Absolutely. Oh, there's no question. And I think I'll spend the rest of my life learning more about it, for sure. I mean, it's not a simple thing, but that's why people are so fascinated, because it's a riddle that is basically, changing the sociocultural context of who we think our ancestors were.
Well, and of course, some people believe, and I believe myself, that this human shell that we're here, we're essentially made up of energy. The human body, of course, gets us around on this planet and allows us to do day-to-day things, but it's still all comes down to energy, and maybe this shape, this symbol, this shape, this device can in some way, shape, or form alter it, but who knows how?
Well, and I want to know how. And
I do too.
Yeah, and so it is about energy. It's not just the shape of the pyramid. There's much more that goes with it. Like I said, 7 characteristics, and it has a lot to do with the double helix of the quartz crystal under pressure. And so, I mean, the more I learn, the more fascinated I am. But for sure, the ancients understood that. And so, Hakeem would say that the symbol of the staff, the long staff with the bird head that had a forked base that never touches the ground, is the symbol of the body, the human body, the balance of the body. And so the fact that it doesn't touch the ground, doesn't touch the floor, it's like our physical body, we're spiritual beings having an earth experience, and we're just touching down here. We're not really here. We're spiritual beings having an earth experience. So that's embedded in the symbolism, and how they worked with energy is all over the frescoes. And it took a long, long, long time looking at my pictures to stumble upon some of these truths. And of course, Hakeem, had a lot of information, but he wouldn't just teach it. Like, I had to already know. He was my mentor for 10 years. I visited him every day I was in Egypt when I didn't have a group, and I lived over there for 2.5 years. And, if I'd say, well, tell me all about this, and he'd say, he wouldn't do anything. And I'd say, well, does this go with this, and Nefertiti and Akhenaten, and this, and this, and this? And then once he realized I was on it, he wouldn't stop talking for 3 days. So there's a lot to it, but the most important thing is to get out of the paradigm that we're in now, or else you can't possibly understand them.
And start to think outside of the box a little bit.
That's correct.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's just our social conditioning. It's we've been, so many of us, and I include myself in that. We've been trained over the years of just a certain way to think, and again, I think more and more people, and that's why I do this radio show. I've been doing it I'm going into my 6th year. I'm no expert in any of these fields, but to bring different people like yourself on the program, because there's so many people that do listen, that they have questions. They want to ask out-of-the-box questions, especially when it comes to religion. For so many people, they've believed things have been handed down for generations, and this is how we believe. This is how we believe. We don't question things. But I think in general, society, not all, but some people are starting to think outside of the box, look outside of the box and say, you know what, there's a lot more to this picture than me getting up, going to the 9-to-5 job, paying my bills, paying my mortgage, paying on credit cards, eating dinner and going to bed. I mean, there's more to life, and it takes, I think, a lot of us a lifetime or to get down the road quite a ways before we realize these things.
Well, the ancient Egyptians certainly understood all of that. Definitely. And so they really knew how to live. And that's one of the reasons why it's hard for us to understand them, because they just didn't think the way we think. And they certainly had a much better time. And I've had an issue with, utilities, taxes, interest, and insurance, that it's all some kind of system. All of that should be free. And the ancients, and especially in pre-dynastic matriarchal times, totally understood that, life had a different purpose than being a debt slave. Right.
And sadly, that's how so many of us are. We're entrenched in it, or it's entrenched in us. It's just it's a continuation, and we see that. And again, it's kind of sad because again, these, like with all your research, so many people need to know about this type of research. So many people need to experience, and they need to open their eyes and read and take a look at things and learn a little bit of something from the past gone by. But again, it's hard to get out of that rut.
Well, if you really analyze how we got that way, and the propaganda and the public relations that's looking to turn us into consumers, hoping we'll go blind, and hoping we'll be so distracted that all we'll do is give our energy to the guy who's going to get all the money for our hard work. That's the program. And they even call what's on TV a program, and that's what we're meant to look through. We're meant to wake up and understand this, and the ancients certainly were outside of that. So that's the whole point.
As you do your research, and I'm sure that every time you go there and see things, you learn something new. Have you ever, how can I put this in simple terms for me, have you ever found an ancient cookbook of sorts, not for cooking food, but an ancient cookbook of life, or some of the ancient philosophies that people used to build like these great structures, to live their way of life? Is it written somewhere? Does it start to come to you on its own through the different graphics, the different hieroglyphics that you see? Does it start to come together?
Well, I mean, I've been at this my whole life, and no, it's not. There's no recipe book. There's no ABC. This is the authoritative view of Egypt, but that's what we're doing. Like, they say this is the university course. The professor's the authority. Listen to him or else. And so that's not how it works, and it's the best mystery going. And of course, it starts to come together. But for me, a lot of my motivation has been triggered by past lives. And so that, of course, gives a hypothesis, not more. So you can get a hypothesis from a dream or from a hunch or from a past life regression or something like that. But then you still have to verify it. And so the first couple of times I was in Egypt by myself and I overheard the Egyptologist, which is why I don't recommend groups, that you just go and pick anybody. I just about passed out when I heard him talking about Ramses. I'd look over and I'd say, that's not Ramses. Why do you think it's Ramses? Because he was told to say that. And so there's so much misinformation, and we're really, meant to not figure it out. So it's been quite a journey for me to trust my own senses. And I went looking for places. One of them took me 10 years to find. This one here is the new one. It took me 25 years. And again, it's not exactly verified, but I went around for 10 years looking for this one place in Egypt, and it was like nope, getting warm, getting cool, nope, and then I go back to Canada. So in ways, doing the book research of the ancient texts, which of course is just enough to make you dizzy too, because there's so much that's wrong with it, and you might find a crumb that may be right. So what's really has been necessary for me is tuning in the discernment, where my body will say yes, no. And once I found this place, it ran like a movie. I kicked off my shoes, I could smell the flowers, I could see the robes, I knew that around the corner behind this wall there would be a little door, there was. And so I was actually tapping into yes. And it turned out to be one of the most highly restricted places on the plateau. But I found it. And so that overwhelming yes is motivation, and, an ordinary no later is, yep, that's a no. So here you go.
How about some of these passageways, Doctor, and tunnels that not tunnels but chambers and different, when with Chris Dunn talking about how these robots have climbed through different things. Has there been any other symbolism found in some of these secret little passages, if you will? Has anything out of the ordinary being found or discovered in these little tunnels and these little alcoves? Okay,
well, there's alcoves,
mm-hmm.
and then there's the star chambers, not chambers, the passageways that you're talking about that Upanaut went up. There's the big chambers. There's the passageways in between. So it's not just one set. It's extremely complex. There are no hieroglyphs anywhere inside the Great Pyramid except for graffiti. That was no doubt added later because it's a completely different style. So it's paint from the workmen that are up in the receiving chambers above the Great Pyramid. But no, and it would be like putting decorations in your oven, or decorating inside the drain of the sink. It's a machine. It's not meant to be a temple, a decorative temple. It just isn't. So there's no hieroglyphic. They've never ever found a mummy inside one of these straight-sided pyramids, and it's far more complex than you would ever guess.
Has anybody ever mapped one of these pyramids out?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean as far as its physical structure.
Oh, sure. Flinders Petrie was doing that in 1881. Mark Lehner from the University of Chicago Oriental Institute did a Giza mapping project. There are charts and maps, but that doesn't mean that all the chambers have necessarily been found.
Right.
The pyramids themselves have been mapped with where their chambers are, and you can find that online.
Interesting, very interesting. Have they ever been X-rayed of sorts, or has anybody used any sort of sonar equipment on these structures?
Well, the fact that you can't fly over them makes that difficult. But now we have a new technology. It's being loosely referred to as space archaeology. But there's many, many different techniques, all the way from just looking at Google Earth and following the surface and needle in a haystack style to just go look around. But that's just looking at the surface. Right. So there's been ground-penetrating radar in the olden days that was used by laying wires right down on the sand and putting low impulses of electricity through and seeing if there's anomalies below. But that was only able to go 5, then 8, then 12 meters. But a lot of what's under there is far, far, far deeper. And so the new technology has been spearheaded by a friend of Klaus Donna's, and I met him at the Hidden Mysteries Conference, and he's somewhat of a museum curator who receives exhibitions. Those words get all crossed. And he received one for 3 months of out-of-place artifacts, and then all of a sudden he said, "Oh yeah, I'll tell you where all those things come from," and he wasn't able to do any of it. So he switched his focus, but then that brought him to a lot of places around the world that had underground mechanisms and secrets that weren't excavated yet, and so he teamed up with a man, a genius actually, in Germany, who developed on his own a software program involving longitudinal light waves and logarithms that have a different signature for each element, but it has the capacity of going up to 6 kilometers deep into the Earth. But each element has a different signature, so it's a different software program like Excel or Word that goes for bone, pottery, precious metals, precious jewels, water, and space, basically, and bone. And so they can scan an area and look all the way down. But the brilliance of this is that once they strike something, they can look through it. And if they strike something else, they can look through that. And so I mentioned there's a couple of words here: reliability, validity, and verifiability.